Hi, my name is Eryndor Valecrest, and I watched my brother-in-law smile as he handed me bankruptcy papers, thinking he'd destroyed my construction business with his embezzlement scheme. He and my wife's family believed they'd buried me with forged invoices and missing project funds, convinced I'd never figure out where the money really went. But when I opened that encrypted laptop in the FBI field office, his confident smirk crumbled like concrete in an earthquake. You ever been framed so thoroughly that even your own wife questioned your integrity? Stick around, because that doubt didn't last long when federal agents started making arrests. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Thornwick Community Center conference room had seen better days, but it was neutral ground, and that morning I needed all the neutrality I could get. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the worn carpet and mismatched chairs arranged around a table that wobbled when you leaned on it. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a manila folder that contained what remained of my business records after 3 months of financial chaos. Malvin Corith walked in precisely on time, flanked by his attorney and my wife Janice. The contrast couldn't have been starker. While I sat alone in my 10-year-old suit that had seen too many construction site meetings, Malvin wore a charcoal gray ensemble that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His leather briefcase gleamed under the fluorescent glare, and his cologne preceded him into the room like an advance guard announcing royalty. Janice wouldn't make eye contact with me. She'd been distant for weeks now, ever since the first accusations surfaced about missing funds from our joint construction business, Valecrest and Associates. The woman who used to greet me at the door with coffee and updates about our projects now treated me like a stranger she'd rather avoid. Eryndor, Malvin said, his voice carrying that particular tone successful people use when they're about to deliver bad news to someone they consider beneath them. I appreciate you coming. I know this is difficult, but we need to address the elephant in the room. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Vornell, spread documents across the table like she was dealing cards in a high-stakes game. Mr. Valecrest, we've been reviewing the financial records of your construction business, and there are some serious discrepancies we need to discuss. I glanced at the papers. Bank statements, invoice records, project ledgers, everything laid out in neat columns that painted a picture I barely recognized. According to these documents, I'd been systematically skimming money from client payments, inflating material costs, and pocketing the difference. This can't be right, I said, reaching for one of the bank statements. I don't recognize half these transactions. Malvin leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was preparing to deliver a sermon. Eryndor, I understand this is embarrassing. Addiction makes people do things they never thought they'd do. The gambling problem, the mounting debts, it all adds up. I don't have a gambling problem, I replied, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Janice finally spoke, her words hitting like physical blows. The receipts from Silverdale Casino tell a different story. The credit card charges, the cash advances, the loans you took out without telling me. She slid another stack of papers across the table. Casino receipts, credit applications, loan documents, all bearing my signature. The amounts were staggering. Thousands of dollars in gambling losses spread across 6 months. Perfectly timed to coincide with the missing funds from our business accounts. I've never been to Silverdale Casino, I said, examining the receipts more closely. The signatures looked like mine, but something felt off about the pen strokes. Too smooth, too confident for someone supposedly desperate enough to embezzle from his own business. Patricia Vornell cleared her throat. Mr. Valecrest, we understand this is a difficult admission, but the evidence speaks for itself. Your business partner, Mr. Corith, has been covering the shortfalls out of his own pocket to protect the company's reputation and maintain relationships with your clients. Malvin nodded solemnly, playing the role of the suffering saint. I didn't want to believe it either, but when clients started asking questions about delayed payments to subcontractors, when material suppliers began demanding cash up front, I had to investigate. He gestured to another folder Patricia produced. These are statements from 3 different subcontractors who say they haven't been paid for work completed over 2 months ago. The Oakenfeld Mall renovation project, the Westbrook Medical Center expansion, the Thornwick Elementary School roof repair, all of them showing the same pattern. I recognized the projects immediately. They were some of our biggest contracts, jobs that should have generated substantial profits for the company. But according to these records, the money had vanished into a maze of unauthorized transactions and suspicious cash withdrawals. "The clients paid their invoices," I said, flipping through the documents. "I processed these payments myself." "And then you moved the money," Malvin replied, his voice carrying just the right mixture of disappointment and concern. "The paper trail is clear, Eryndor. Client payments coming in, funds transferred to secondary accounts, then converted to cash or spent at various gambling establishments." Janice reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I found this in your desk drawer at home," she said, placing it on the table. "You should listen to what you said 3 weeks ago when you thought I was asleep." She pressed play, and my voice filled the room. Slurred, desperate, confessing to taking money from the business to cover gambling debts, talking about forged invoices and manipulated records, planning to blame accounting software glitches if anyone discovered the discrepancies. The voice was mine, but the words felt foreign, like listening to someone else's confession played through a speaker that happened to share my vocal patterns. I stared at the device, trying to remember making that recording, but my memory offered nothing but blank space. I don't remember saying that," I stammered. Patricia Vornell leaned forward. "Mr. Valecrest, we're prepared to handle this quietly. No criminal charges, no public scandal, but you'll need to sign over your share of the business to Mr. Carraith and agree to seek professional help for your gambling addiction." She slid a legal document across the table. "This transfer agreement ensures the business can continue operating while you get the help you need. Mr. Carraith will maintain relationships with existing clients and honor all current contracts." Malvin's expression was a masterpiece of reluctant authority. "I never wanted it to come to this, Eryndor. You're family. But I can't let your problems destroy everything we've built. Think about the employees, the clients who trust us, the reputation we've spent years establishing." I looked around the room at the 3 faces staring back at me. My wife, who'd stopped believing in me. My brother-in-law, who'd positioned himself as the responsible party cleaning up my mess. The attorney, who treated this like just another Tuesday morning transaction. "I need time to review these documents," I said finally. "Of course," Patricia replied, checking her watch. "But understand, Mr. Valecrest, time isn't really on your side here. If this becomes a criminal matter, the consequences will be much more severe than signing a business transfer agreement." Malvin stood up, smoothing his expensive suit. "Eryndor, you have until Friday. After that, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. I've already had to make explanations to 3 different clients about delayed payments. I can't keep covering for you indefinitely." As they gathered their documents and prepared to leave, Janice paused at the door. "I'll be staying at my sister's place for a while," she said without looking back. "Until you figure out how to fix this." The conference room fell silent except for the humming fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Thornwick Avenue. I sat alone, staring at the legal documents that would dissolve 12 years of my professional life with a simple signature. But something nagged at me about the casino receipts. The handwriting looked like mine, but I'd never been much of a gambler. A beer and a football game occasionally, maybe a scratch-off lottery ticket at Christmas. But nothing that would generate thousands of dollars in losses. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every document they'd left behind. If I was going to lose everything, I wanted to understand exactly how it had happened. The casino receipts, the loan applications, the mysterious bank transfers. All of it felt like pieces of a puzzle designed by someone who knew me well enough to forge my signature but not well enough to replicate my actual behavior patterns. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to either accept defeat or figure out what had really happened to the missing money. As I walked out of the Thornwick Community Center, the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. Everything in my life was dying, but sometimes death was just the prelude to resurrection. The next 3 days felt like living inside a nightmare designed specifically to break me down piece by piece. Word had spread through Millbrook's tight-knit construction community with the efficiency of a well-oiled gossip machine, and everywhere I went, conversations stopped when I approached, then resumed in hushed whispers after I passed. Tuesday morning, I stopped by Henderson's hardware supply, where I'd been buying materials for 15 years. Old Tom Henderson, who'd given me my first store credit when I was just starting out, barely acknowledged my presence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Morning, Tom," I said, approaching the counter with a list of supplies for a small bathroom renovation job. He glanced up from his inventory sheets, his weathered face showing none of the usual warmth. "Eryndor, heard you're having some financial difficulties." "Nothing that can't be worked out," I replied, though even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Tom's expression hardened. "Malvin stopped by yesterday. Paid off your outstanding balance. Said he'd be handling all future orders for Valecrest and Associates. Mentioned something about you needing to step back from business operations for health reasons." The words hit like a physical blow. Outstanding balance. I'd always paid my bills at Henderson's within 30 days, usually sooner. "What outstanding balance?" Tom pulled out a thick folder and showed me invoices dating back 3 months. Materials for jobs I recognized, but purchase orders I'd never signed. Thousands of dollars worth of supplies, all charged to accounts bearing my name and signature. "Tom, I didn't authorize these purchases. Half these materials I've never even used these brands." He shrugged, but I could see doubt flickering in his eyes. "Signatures look like yours, same account numbers you've always used." "Malvin said you might not remember everything clearly, what with the stress and all." I photographed the invoices with my phone, noting discrepancies. The signature was close, but whoever forged it had missed the small flourish I always added to the V in Valecrest. More importantly, several of the material orders were for projects I'd never worked on, jobs that didn't exist in my records. "Tom, can you give me copies of these invoices? I need to review them with my accountant." "Already sent copies to Malvin yesterday. He's handling the account now." Tom's tone suggested the conversation was over. Wednesday brought more bad news. I arrived at the Westbrook Medical Center expansion site to check on progress, only to find the construction gate locked and a security guard stationed at the entrance. "Sorry, sir, but you're not authorized to enter this site," the guard said, checking his clipboard. "I'm Eryndor Valecrest, project manager for this job. I built this site plan." The guard, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shook his head apologetically. "I have specific instructions. No access for Mr. Valecrest. All communications go through Malvin Caraith at the main office." I could see through the chain-link fence to where work was continuing. My crew, led by foreman Danny Rockwell, was installing the medical equipment foundations I'd designed. Danny noticed me at the gate and walked over, his expression troubled. "Hey boss, what's going on? Malvin came by this morning, said you were taking a leave of absence for personal reasons, told us to report directly to him from now on." "Danny, has anyone been here asking questions about payments or missing materials?" He glanced toward the security guard, then leaned closer to the fence. "Yeah, actually. Some guy in a suit, claimed to be from an insurance company. Asked a lot of questions about invoice procedures, who handled purchase orders, whether we'd noticed any irregularities in supply deliveries." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Truth. That you handled all the paperwork, kept detailed records, never had any problems with suppliers or payments, but he seemed more interested in whether we'd seen you acting strangely lately, maybe seeming stressed about money or making unusual phone calls." The insurance investigator was another piece of Malvin's carefully constructed narrative. Plant questions about my behavior with my own crew, get them thinking about signs of financial stress they might have missed. "Danny, I need you to keep detailed records of everything happening on this job. Timesheets, material deliveries, any conversations with Malvin or other outsiders. Can you do that for me?" He nodded slowly. "Eryndor, I don't know what's going on, but something doesn't feel right about this whole situation. Malvin's making changes to your construction plans, ordering different materials than what you specified. Says it's for cost control, but some of these substitutions don't make sense." Thursday morning brought the final blow. I received a certified letter from Millbrook First National Bank, informing me that my business line of credit had been suspended pending a fraud investigation. The letter referenced suspicious activity patterns and potential misuse of funds, recommending I contact their security department immediately. I called the bank and was transferred to James Morrison, the security officer handling my case. "Mr. Valecrest, we've been monitoring some unusual transaction patterns on your business accounts. Large cash withdrawals, wire transfers to unfamiliar accounts, several checks written to individuals not in your normal vendor database." "I didn't authorize any unusual transactions," I replied, though the words felt increasingly hollow. Morrison's voice carried the professional neutrality of someone who'd heard every excuse. "Sir, we have security footage of you making several large cash withdrawals over the past 2 months. We also have copies of checks bearing your signature made out to various individuals for services rendered." He faxed copies of the security photos to my home office. The images were grainy, but clearly showed someone who looked like me at various ATM locations around Millbrook. Same height, same build, wearing clothes I recognized from my own closet. But something felt wrong about the posture, the way the person held their shoulders. The checks were more troubling. Large amounts paid to names I didn't recognize, all for vague services like consultation fees and project management. The signatures looked identical to mine, but the check register showed transactions I'd never recorded. That afternoon, I sat in my home office surrounded by photographs, documents, and a growing sense that I was fighting an opponent who knew every move I might make. The evidence against me was overwhelming, but it felt like evidence constructed by someone with intimate knowledge of my business practices and personal habits. I pulled out the legal documents Malvin wanted me to sign. The business transfer agreement would give him complete control of Valecrest and Associates, including all current contracts, client relationships, and future earnings. In exchange, I'd receive a modest settlement and written assurance that no criminal charges would be filed. My wife Janice had been gone for 2 days, staying with her sister Lunara in the Pinefield suburb across town. She'd taken most of her clothes and personal items, leaving behind only a note saying she needed time to process everything that was happening. The note was written in her handwriting, but the tone felt alien, cold, distant, nothing like the woman who'd supported my business dreams for 12 years. Even her criticism had always carried warmth, concern for my well-being rather than disappointment in my character. As darkness fell over Millbrook, I realized I had less than 12 hours to make a decision that would determine the rest of my life. Sign Malvin's papers and accept guilt for crimes I couldn't remember committing, or refuse to sign and face potential criminal prosecution for embezzlement and fraud. But there was a third option. Instead of accepting or denying the accusations, I could investigate them. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to build a case against me, creating documents, forging signatures, even manipulating security footage. That level of sophistication required planning, resources, and detailed knowledge of my business operations. I opened my laptop and began making a list of every discrepancy I'd noticed. The casino receipts with signatures that were close, but not perfect. The material orders from Henderson's Hardware for jobs that didn't exist. The security footage showing someone who looked like me but moved differently. The checks written to people I'd never met. Taken individually, each piece of evidence was damning. But viewed collectively, they formed a pattern that looked less like addiction-driven embezzlement and more like systematic identity theft designed to destroy my business and my reputation. Someone wanted me gone, and they'd spent months building the perfect trap. The question wasn't whether I could prove my innocence. The question was whether I could prove their guilt before they finished destroying everything I'd spent 15 years building. Friday morning was 12 hours away, and I had work to do. Friday arrived with the kind of gray October drizzle that made everything in Millbrook look tired and defeated. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the growing conviction that someone was trying to frame me for embezzlement. The deadline Malvin had given me loomed at 5 p.m., and I still hadn't decided whether to sign his papers or fight accusations I couldn't yet prove were fabricated. But I'd spent those sleepless hours building something more valuable than a defense, a methodical investigation into the evidence against me. What started as desperate fact-checking had evolved into a systematic analysis of financial records, security footage, and document authentication that painted a very different picture than the one Malvin wanted me to accept. I began with the casino receipts from Silverdale Casino. The signatures looked identical to mine at first glance, but under a magnifying glass I'd borrowed from my construction toolkit, subtle differences emerged. The person who forged my signature had excellent technical skills, but missed tiny personal quirks I'd developed over years of signing contracts and invoices. The pressure points were wrong, the pen lifts occurred in different places, and the overall rhythm felt mechanical rather than natural. More importantly, I'd called Silverdale Casino Wednesday evening and spoken with their security director about their surveillance systems. Every table, every slot machine, every cash cage transaction was recorded and stored for 90 days. If I'd really been gambling away thousands of dollars, Those videos would show me clearly engaged in various games over multiple visits. I'd be happy to review footage for the dates in question, the security director had said. We cooperate fully with fraud investigations. Can you provide specific dates and times? I gave him the information from the casino receipts, and he'd promised to compile relevant footage by Friday afternoon. The fact that he seemed genuinely helpful rather than evasive suggested they had nothing to hide, which meant the receipts might be complete fabrications. Thursday night, I'd driven to each ATM location shown in the bank security photos. The timestamps on the images corresponded to specific days and times I could account for through other means. 3 of the supposed cash withdrawal times occurred while I was in documented meetings with clients or subcontractors. 2 others happened during City Planning Committee sessions that were recorded and archived by the municipal government. The most telling discrepancy involved a photo allegedly showing me withdrawing $3,000 from the First National Branch on Oakenfield Street at 2:47 p.m. on September 15th. But September 15th was the day I'd spent 6 hours at Millbrook General Hospital while Janice underwent surgery for a kidney stone. I had parking receipts, medical appointment records, and testimony from 3 different hospital staff members who could verify my presence. Someone was using my appearance and forged documents to create a false narrative, but they'd made a critical error in timing. You can fake a signature and manipulate photographs, but you can't change official records maintained by hospitals, government agencies, and financial institutions with their own security protocols. I'd also been analyzing the invoices Tom Henderson showed me at the hardware store. The material orders included several items that puzzled me. Premium-grade copper piping for projects that used PVC, imported Italian tiles for jobs that specified domestic ceramic, industrial-strength adhesives for applications that required standard construction glue. Either I'd suddenly developed expensive taste in materials I'd never cared about before, or someone with limited construction knowledge had been placing orders without understanding the technical requirements. More significantly, 3 of the large material orders corresponded to projects that didn't exist in my business records. The Westbrook Shopping Plaza renovation and Millbrook Community College dormitory upgrade were substantial jobs that would have required permits, insurance filings, and contract documentation. But when I searched municipal records, building permit databases, and insurance company files, no trace of these projects existed. Someone had invented phantom construction jobs to justify large material purchases, probably reselling the supplies elsewhere while sticking me with the invoices. The scheme was sophisticated enough to fool a casual observer, but fell apart under detailed scrutiny. By Thursday evening, I had evidence suggesting systematic fraud, but I still didn't know who was orchestrating it or why. The obvious suspect was Malvin, but I needed more than suspicion to make accusations against my brother-in-law, especially when he appeared to be helping me resolve financial problems. Then I remembered something Janice had mentioned months ago about Malvin's new business ventures. He'd been expanding beyond his original accounting practice, investing in real estate development and construction supply companies. I'd paid little attention at the time, but now those investments took on different significance. I spent Friday morning researching Malvin's business activities through public records and online databases. What I discovered was enlightening. Over the past year, he'd acquired controlling interests in 3 construction-related businesses: Morrison Building Supply, Westbrook Equipment Rental, and Silverdale Construction Management. All 3 companies had been struggling financially until recent capital infusions that corresponded roughly to the timeline of my supposed gambling losses. Morrison Building Supply was particularly interesting. They specialized in premium construction materials, exactly the type of expensive supplies that had been ordered through my accounts at Henderson's Hardware. If Malvin owned Morrison Building Supply, he could generate legitimate invoices for materials that were never actually delivered to my job sites, then resell those materials through his own company at full profit. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Create false material orders using my forged signature. Have the supplies delivered to Morrison Building Supply instead of my construction sites. Then bill the costs to my business accounts while reselling the materials for additional profit. Henderson's Hardware would see legitimate purchase orders with my signature, while Morrison Building Supply would receive premium materials they could sell without any cost basis. But proving this theory required more than public records and logical deduction. I needed documentation showing the actual flow of materials and money, evidence that connected Malvin's businesses to the fraudulent activities conducted in my name. That's when I remembered Danny Rockwell mentioning changes to construction specifications on the Westbrook Medical Center project. If Malvin was substituting cheaper materials for the premium supplies supposedly ordered in my name, there would be a paper trail showing both the original specifications and the actual materials delivered to job sites. I called Danny Friday morning and asked him to meet me at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook, away from the construction site where Malvin might overhear our conversation. "Danny, I need you to do something that might seem strange, but it's important. Can you get me copies of all material delivery receipts for the Westbrook job, both what was originally specified and what was actually delivered?" Danny looked uncomfortable. "Eryndor, Malvin specifically said not to discuss project details with anyone outside the company." "Danny, I think someone's been stealing from the company and trying to blame me for it. Those material substitutions might be evidence of fraud, not cost-saving measures." He considered this for a long moment. "I've been wondering about some of those changes. Switching from copper to PVC makes sense for cost control, but some of the other substitutions seemed technically questionable. And we've had delivery trucks showing up with materials we didn't order, then leaving with supplies that were supposedly delivered." "What do you mean?" Tuesday, a Morrison Building supply truck delivered premium ceramic tiles for the lobby renovation, but the invoice showed standard-grade tiles at half the price. The driver said there was a mix-up in the warehouse, but he still charged us for the cheap tiles while delivering the expensive ones. This was the break I'd been looking for. Danny had witnessed the material substitution scheme in operation, confirming my suspicions about how Malvin was manipulating purchase orders and deliveries. "Danny, can you document these discrepancies without arousing suspicion? Take photos of delivered materials, keep copies of all invoices, maybe record conversations where people mention unusual delivery procedures?" "I can try, but I'm taking a risk here. If Malvin finds out I'm investigating him, I'll lose my job. If we don't stop him, the whole company will disappear, and everyone will lose their jobs anyway." As I left the coffee shop, I felt like a detective who'd finally found the thread that would unravel the entire conspiracy. Malvin wasn't just embezzling from my business. He was using sophisticated financial manipulation to steal materials, inflate costs, and create false evidence of gambling addiction to cover his tracks. But I still needed irrefutable proof before confronting him or involving law enforcement. Friday afternoon was approaching, and I had to decide whether to sign his papers or call his bluff. The problem was, even if I was right about the fraud, I didn't yet have evidence strong enough to convince a skeptical audience that my brother-in-law was the real criminal. That's when I realized I didn't need to convince anyone immediately. I just needed to buy time to gather more evidence. And sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them think they've won, then document their next moves when they get careless. At 4:30 p.m. on Friday, I sat across from Malvin in the same Thornwick Community Center conference room where this nightmare had begun 3 days earlier. This time, I came prepared with more than just desperate denials and confused protests. I had a plan, a recording device hidden in my jacket pocket, and the beginning of evidence that might eventually prove his guilt. But I also understood that confronting him directly would be suicide. He'd spent months building a case against me, creating documentation and witness testimony that painted me as an embezzling gambler. I had theories and suspicions, but theories don't hold up in court against fabricated bank records and forged signatures. So instead of fighting, I decided to surrender strategically. "Malvin," I said, pulling out the business transfer documents he'd prepared, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Tuesday. About my gambling problem, about the damage I've done to the company, about what's best for everyone involved." His expression shifted from cautious optimism to barely concealed satisfaction. "I'm glad you're being realistic about the situation, Eryndor. I know this is painful, but acknowledging the problem is the first step toward recovery." Patricia Vornell, his attorney, leaned forward expectantly. Janice, who had been silent and distant throughout the week, finally looked directly at me with something that might have been relief, mixed with disappointment. "I want to sign the papers," I continued, "but I need some assurances first. About the employees, about completing current projects, about how this transition will be handled with existing clients." Malvin's eyes lit up like a predator scenting wounded prey. "Of course. I've already prepared transition plans for every active project. Our employees will keep their jobs, clients will experience no service disruption, and all current contracts will be honored in full." He slid a folder across the table. "These are the project summaries and client communication plans. As you can see, I've been working hard to minimize the damage from your financial irregularities. I opened the folder and began reviewing documents that represented 12 years of my professional life being systematically transferred to someone else's control. But I was looking for specific information, details about material orders, supplier relationships, and financial procedures that might reveal more about his embezzlement scheme. I see you've made some changes to the material specifications, I said, pointing to the Westbrook Medical Center documentation. Switching from copper to PVC, using domestic tiles instead of imported, standard adhesives instead of premium grades. Cost control measures, Malvin replied smoothly. With the financial irregularities, we need to reduce expenses wherever possible to maintain profitability. But the original invoices show premium materials were ordered and paid for. Are we getting refunds from suppliers for the grade substitutions? Patricia Vornell interjected before Malvin could respond. Mr. Valecrest, these operational details will be handled by Mr. Carafe after the ownership transfer is complete. Your focus should be on the legal documents we need signed today. But I'd seen something in Malvin's expression when I mentioned the supplier refunds. A micro-expression of concern, quickly masked but unmistakably present. He hadn't expected me to ask about the financial details of his cost-cutting measures. Of course, I said, pulling out a pen, but I want to make sure I understand the complete financial picture before I sign. For instance, what happens to the outstanding receivables from completed projects? The Oakenfield Mall renovation and Thornwick Elementary roof repair should generate substantial payments over the next 60 days. Malvin consulted his notes. Those receivables will be applied to outstanding debts and operational expenses. After covering the gambling-related losses and supplier payments, there should be enough left to provide you with a modest settlement. How modest? Approximately $15,000, plus agreement to cover your gambling addiction treatment costs. I almost laughed. 12 years of building a construction business that generated over $2 million in annual revenue, and he was offering me $15,000 to walk away quietly. But more importantly, he'd just admitted that substantial receivables were expected from projects I'd completed, which meant clients had been satisfied with the work and were planning to pay in full. That seems fair, I lied, signing the first page of the transfer documents. But I'm curious about something. These casino receipts from Silverdale Casino, some of the dates seem wrong to me. Are you sure these are accurate? I pulled out copies of the gambling receipts and spread them on the table, pointing to specific dates and amounts. This one from September 15th for $3,000. I remember that date because Janice was in the hospital for kidney stone surgery. I spent the entire day in the waiting room. Janice's face went pale. That's right, you were there all day. I remember because you missed that important client meeting with the Patterson Construction Group. Malvin's composure slipped slightly. Memory can be unreliable when you're under stress. The bank security footage confirms you made those withdrawals. But the hospital has records showing I was there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Parking receipts, visitor logs, cafeteria purchases. How could I be at Silverdale Casino and Millbrook General Hospital simultaneously? Patricia Vornell stepped in again. Mr. Valecrest, these discrepancies can be resolved after the business transfer is complete. What matters now is preventing further damage to the company's reputation. But I could see doubt flickering in Janice's eyes. For the first time in weeks, she was looking at me like the man she'd married instead of the criminal she'd been told I'd become. I signed the second page of the transfer documents, then paused. Malvin, can I ask you something personal? How did you know about my gambling problem before I did? These receipts go back 6 months. But you only mentioned concerns about my behavior 3 weeks ago. His answer came too quickly, like he'd rehearsed it. I'd been noticing small signs for months. Mood changes, financial stress, irregular work patterns. But I didn't want to intrude on your privacy until the missing money forced my hand. What missing money specifically? Can you show me which client payments or project funds went missing? For the first time, Malvin looked genuinely uncomfortable. The discrepancies are complex, spread across multiple accounts and projects. My accountants are still reconciling the exact amounts. But you said I embezzled enough to threaten the company's survival. Surely you have specific figures for how much is missing and which accounts were affected. Patricia Vornell slammed her folder shut. Mr. Valecrest, these questions suggest you're not negotiating in good faith. Either sign the documents now, or we'll have no choice but to pursue criminal charges immediately. The threat was designed to end my questions and force a quick signature, but it had the opposite effect. If they really had solid evidence of embezzlement, they wouldn't be so eager to avoid detailed financial discussions. Criminal prosecutors love detailed financial evidence. It makes their cases stronger, not weaker. "I'll sign," I said, reaching for the final pages. "But I want copies of everything for my records. Bank statements, casino receipts, material invoices, all of it. If I'm going to treatment for gambling addiction, my counselors will need complete documentation." Malvin and Patricia exchanged glances. "We can provide summaries and relevant excerpts," Patricia said carefully. "I need complete records, not summaries. Full bank statements, original invoices, unedited security footage. Otherwise, how can I properly address my addiction issues?" The request was reasonable on its surface, but I could see it made them nervous. Complete documentation would include details they probably preferred to keep hidden, evidence that might reveal the manipulation and fabrication underlying their accusations. "Fine," Malvin said finally. "I'll have my office prepare complete financial records for your review." I signed the last page of the transfer documents with a flourish, then looked up at my brother-in-law with what I hoped appeared to be defeated gratitude. "Thank you, Malvin, for everything, for covering the missing funds, for protecting the employees, for giving me a chance to get help instead of going to prison. I know this wasn't easy for you." His smile was warm and reassuring, the expression of a man who'd just acquired a profitable construction business for the price of a modest settlement and forged paperwork. "Family takes care of family, Eryndor. I just want you to get better." As we left the community center, Janice walked beside me for the first time in days. "Eryndor, about that September 15th casino receipt, you really were at the hospital with me all day, weren't you?" "From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I have parking receipts and cafeteria purchase records if you want to see them." She was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe we should look at those other dates too." Just to be sure, that evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the signed transfer documents and the recordings I'd made during our meeting. Malvin now legally controlled Valecrest and Associates, but he'd also committed to providing complete financial records that might reveal the full scope of his fraud. More importantly, I'd planted seeds of doubt in Janice's mind about the gambling allegations. If she started questioning the casino receipts, she might also start questioning other pieces of evidence that had seemed convincing in isolation but didn't hold up under scrutiny. I had officially lost my business, but I'd gained something potentially more valuable: time to investigate, documentation of Malvin's claims, and the beginning of ally support from the one person who knew me well enough to recognize when evidence didn't match reality. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield where I might finally have some advantages. The first sign that Malvin wasn't satisfied with his victory came Monday morning when FBI Special Agent Patricia Quinlan knocked on my door at 7:30 a.m. She was a compact woman with steel gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd been investigating financial crimes long enough to recognize patterns most people missed. "Mr. Valecrest, I'm Agent Quinlan with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to discuss some irregularities in federal contract work performed by your former company." Federal contracts. In 12 years of construction work, I'd only handled 2 federal projects: a small renovation at the Millbrook Post Office and security upgrades at the federal building downtown. Both were minor jobs, completed years ago with full documentation and satisfied clients. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, inviting her inside. Agent Quinlan settled into my living room chair and opened a thick folder. "We've received reports of fraudulent billing on federal projects, inflated material costs, and kickback arrangements with government contractors. Your name has come up in connection with these activities." She showed me invoices I'd never seen before. Federal projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all bearing my signature and the Valecrest and Associates letterhead. The Millbrook Federal Courthouse expansion, Veterans Administration clinic upgrades, Postal Service facility modernization, projects that would have taken months to complete and required extensive federal security clearances. "Agent Quinlan, I never worked on these projects. I don't have federal security clearances, and my company wasn't qualified for contracts this size. Yet we have documentation showing your company submitted winning bids, received substantial down payments, and began work on several facilities. Are you saying someone forged your signature on federal contracts?" The implications hit me like a physical blow. Federal contract fraud carried serious prison time. And unlike the gambling accusations Malvin had manufactured, this involved crimes against the United States government, agencies with unlimited resources for investigation and prosecution. Someone has been forging my signature and using my company name without authorization, I said carefully. I can provide documentation showing I was never involved in these projects. Agent Quinlan made notes. Mr. Valecrest, we're also investigating reports that you've been embezzling from state and federal projects to fund gambling activities. We have evidence of large cash withdrawals corresponding to federal contract payments, along with casino records showing substantial losses. She produced bank statements showing deposits from federal agencies followed by cash withdrawals and transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. The pattern was damning. Government payments flowing in, money immediately converted to cash or moved to suspicious accounts, all supposedly to fund gambling addiction. These accounts aren't mine, I protested, examining the bank statements more closely. The signatures don't match my handwriting, and I never opened accounts at Silverdale Federal Credit Union. The accounts were opened using your Social Security number, driver's license information, and employment records from Valecrest and Associates. Are you suggesting someone stole your identity to commit federal contract fraud? That was exactly what I was suggesting, but I realized how it sounded to a federal agent who'd probably heard every excuse imaginable from financial criminals. Agent Quinlan, someone has been systematically impersonating me for months. They forged signatures, created false documents, and used my business reputation to commit crimes I knew nothing about. I can prove I wasn't involved in these federal projects. She closed her folder and studied me with professional skepticism. Mr. Valecrest, we'll need you to provide complete documentation of your whereabouts during the periods in question, along with any evidence supporting your identity theft claims. You should also consider retaining legal counsel immediately. After Agent Quinlan left, I called Janice at her sister's house. We need to talk immediately. The FBI was just here asking about federal contract fraud. Federal contract fraud? Eryndor, what are you talking about? Someone's been using my name and company to commit crimes against the federal government. This goes way beyond gambling addiction or business embezzlement. We're talking about serious federal charges, prison time, complete destruction of our lives. There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Janice said, I'm coming over. We need to figure out what's really happening here. While waiting for Janice, I called Danny Rockwell and asked him to meet me urgently. When he arrived, I showed him the federal contract invoices Agent Quinlan had presented. Danny, look at these project specifications. The Millbrook Federal Courthouse expansion, supposed to be a $400,000 job. Do you recognize any of the technical details? Danny studied the documents carefully. These specifications don't make sense. They're asking for premium materials and complex installation procedures for work that should be routine. And some of these technical requirements are contradictory, like they were written by someone who doesn't understand construction. What do you mean? This specification calls for imported Italian marble in federal building lobbies, but federal projects almost always require domestic materials for security reasons. And these electrical requirements specify systems that would never be approved for government buildings. Danny's analysis confirmed my suspicions. Someone had been creating fake federal contracts using realistic-sounding project names but technically impossible specifications. They'd forged my signature on these fictional contracts, then used them to justify large cash payments and material purchases. When Janice arrived, I showed her both the federal contract documents and the timeline discrepancies I'd discovered in the original gambling allegations. Janice, look at September 15th. The casino receipt shows me losing $3,000 at Silverdale Casino at 2:47 p.m., but the hospital records show I was with you during your kidney stone surgery from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. How could I be in two places simultaneously? She examined the documents, then pulled out her phone. I have photos from that day. You bought me flowers from the hospital gift shop at 3:15 p.m. Here's the timestamp. The photograph showed me standing beside her hospital bed, holding a bouquet of roses, at exactly the time the casino receipt claimed I was gambling. It was irrefutable proof that the gambling evidence was fabricated. There's more, I continued, showing her the federal contract invoices. Someone's been committing crimes in my name for months, building evidence to make me look guilty of everything they're actually doing themselves. Janice was quiet for a long time, studying the documents and photographs. Finally, she looked up with an expression I hadn't seen in weeks. Belief. Eryndor, who would have access to your signatures, your business letterhead, detailed information about your work patterns and personal schedule? We both knew the answer, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line we couldn't uncross. Malvin, I said quietly, my brother has been destroying you systematically, hasn't he? That evening, Janice and I began compiling evidence of the fraud scheme. We compared signatures on legitimate documents I'd signed with the forged versions on casino receipts and federal contracts. We cross-referenced dates from the gambling allegations with verifiable activities from my calendar and photo records. We analyzed the technical specifications on fake federal projects for inconsistencies that revealed the forger's limited construction knowledge. By midnight, we had assembled a compelling case that someone with intimate knowledge of my business and personal life had been impersonating me for months, committing federal crimes while building evidence to frame me for their activities. But we also realized our situation was more dangerous than we'd initially understood. Federal contract fraud carried potential sentences of 20 years in prison. If Malvin had been operating this scheme for months, there might be additional evidence we hadn't discovered yet. More federal agencies investigating crimes committed in my name. Eryndor, Janice said as we organized the evidence folders. If Malvin has been doing this for months, he's not going to stop just because he got your signature on the business transfer documents. He's going to keep using your identity until someone stops him. She was right. Signing over the business hadn't ended the scheme. It had just given Malvin more legitimate cover for his activities. As long as he could continue impersonating me, he could commit additional crimes while I faced the legal consequences. We need help, I said. This is beyond what we can handle alone. What kind of help? The kind that comes with badges and federal authority to investigate financial crimes. But approaching federal agents as the target of their investigation required strategy. I couldn't just walk into the FBI field office and announce that my brother-in-law was framing me. I needed evidence strong enough to shift their focus from investigating me to investigating him. Fortunately, Malvin had made mistakes. Technical errors in the fake federal contracts, timeline impossibilities in the gambling allegations, signature inconsistencies that could be verified through forensic analysis. He'd built an impressive frame job, but he'd also created evidence of his own guilt for anyone who knew where to look. The question was whether I could convince federal investigators to look before they decided I was guilty of crimes I'd never committed. Tuesday morning, I made a decision that would either save my life or destroy it completely. I called Agent Quinlan and requested another meeting. Agent Quinlan, I have evidence that someone has been systematically impersonating me to commit federal contract fraud. I'd like to present this evidence and cooperate fully with your investigation. There was surprise in her voice. Mr. Valecrest, are you prepared to make a formal statement about these allegations? Yes, but I'm also requesting protective measures. If I'm right about who's been framing me, my cooperation with your investigation could put my family in danger. What kind of danger? I thought about Malvin's satisfied smile when I'd signed over my business, his confidence that he'd solved his poor son-in-law problem permanently. The kind where someone might decide that framing me isn't enough anymore. Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, I sat across from Agent Quinlan in a sterile interview room at the FBI's Millbrook field office. The walls were painted institutional beige, furnished with a metal table, 3 uncomfortable chairs, and a recording device that reminded me this conversation could determine whether I spent the next 20 years in federal prison. Janice sat beside me, her presence providing moral support I desperately needed. Spread across the table were dozens of documents we'd organized the night before. Hospital records, photographs, signature comparisons, technical analyses of the fraudulent federal contracts, and a detailed timeline showing the impossibility of my alleged criminal activities. Agent Quinlan, I began, before we discuss the federal contract allegations, I need to show you evidence that someone has been systematically impersonating me for months. The gambling addiction, the embezzlement charges, the federal crimes, they're all part of an elaborate scheme to frame me, while the real criminal operates with impunity. Agent Quinlan activated the recording device and opened her notebook. Mr. Valecrest, these are serious allegations. Identity theft to commit federal crimes carries severe penalties. Are you prepared to provide specific evidence supporting these claims? I slid the hospital documentation across the table, September 15th, according to casino records, I lost $3,000 gambling at Silverdale Casino at 2:47 p.m. But these hospital records show I was with my wife during her kidney stone surgery from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. that same day. Here are parking receipts, visitor logs, and time-stamped photographs proving I never left Millbrook General Hospital. Agent Quinlan examined the documents carefully, cross-referencing the casino receipt with the hospital paperwork. This is compelling evidence of a timeline discrepancy. What other examples do you have? Janice leaned forward, producing her phone. Agent Quinlan, I have photographs and social media posts documenting my husband's whereabouts during several of the alleged gambling incidents. He was with family at work sites or attending documented business meetings when these casino losses supposedly occurred. For the next hour, we walked Agent Quinlan through a comprehensive analysis of the evidence against me, highlighting inconsistencies, technical impossibilities, and forensic discrepancies that revealed systematic fraud rather than criminal behavior. The federal contract documents were particularly damning to whoever had forged them. The technical specifications contained multiple errors that demonstrated limited construction knowledge, requirements for imported materials in federal buildings, electrical systems that violated government security protocols, structural modifications that would never be approved for public facilities. Agent Quinlan, I said, pointing to the courthouse expansion contract, this specification calls for Italian marble flooring in a federal building lobby. Federal facilities almost exclusively use domestic materials for security reasons. Whoever forged this contract didn't understand basic government procurement requirements. She made detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional documentation. Mr. Valecrest, if someone has been impersonating you to commit these crimes, they would need extensive knowledge of your business operations, personal schedule, and signature patterns. Do you have suspects who meet these criteria? The question I'd been dreading and anticipating simultaneously. Accusing Melvin meant accusing my wife's brother, potentially destroying family relationships permanently. But remaining silent meant accepting responsibility for crimes I'd never committed. My brother-in-law, Melvin Carraith, I said quietly. He's had access to my business records, personal information, and signature samples for years. He's also been pressuring me to sign over my construction company, claiming I embezzled money to fund gambling addiction. Agent Quinlan's expression sharpened. Mr. Carraith contacted our office 2 weeks ago, expressing concern about potential federal contract irregularities involving your company. He provided some of the initial evidence that launched our investigation. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Melvin hadn't just been framing me. He'd been actively cooperating with federal investigators, positioning himself as the concerned family member reporting suspicious activities. He contacted you? Janice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carraith expressed concerns about his brother-in-law's gambling problem and potential misuse of federal contract funds. He provided bank records, casino receipts, and other documentation suggesting financial irregularities. Agent Quinlan studied our faces carefully. Are you suggesting Mr. Carraith fabricated evidence and then reported it to federal authorities to frame you for crimes he committed himself? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, I replied, and I can prove it. I pulled out the signature analysis Janice and I had completed the previous evening. Using a magnifying glass and careful measurement tools, we documented subtle but consistent differences between my genuine signatures and the forged versions on casino receipts, federal contracts, and bank documents. Agent Quinlan, examine the signature on this casino receipt compared to my signature on these legitimate business contracts. The forged version lacks the small flourish I always add to the V in Valecrest, and the pen pressure is different in 3 specific locations. She studied the signature comparisons under her desk lamp. These discrepancies would require forensic handwriting analysis to confirm, but there are observable differences in technique and pressure patterns. There's more, I continued, producing Danny Rockwell's documentation of material delivery irregularities. My former foreman has been witnessing systematic material substitution on construction projects. Premium materials ordered using my forged signature, then replaced with cheaper alternatives while the premium supplies disappear to unknown locations. Agent Quinlan reviewed Danny's photographs and delivery receipts, noting the pattern of expensive materials being invoiced but different, cheaper materials being actually used on job sites. This suggests a sophisticated embezzlement scheme, she observed. Order premium materials using fraudulent signatures, deliver cheaper substitutes to construction sites, then resell the premium materials elsewhere for additional profit. And the profits from those illegal sales could fund the elaborate fraud scheme designed to frame me, I added. Malvin owns Morrison Building Supply, one of the companies that's been involved in these suspicious material transactions. For the first time, Agent Quinlan looked genuinely intrigued rather than skeptical. Mr. Valecrest, if your allegations are accurate, we're looking at a complex criminal conspiracy involving identity theft, federal contract fraud, embezzlement, and evidence fabrication. Are you prepared to cooperate fully with an investigation that might target your brother-in-law? Agent Quinlan, someone has been destroying my life, my business, and my reputation for months. If that someone is Malvin, then yes, I want him investigated and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. She closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Valecrest, I'm going to need you to provide complete documentation of everything you've shown me today, along with signed statements from witnesses like your foreman. We'll also need to conduct forensic analysis of the signature discrepancies and timeline verifications. Does this mean you're investigating Malvin instead of me? It means we're investigating the possibility that you've been the victim of identity theft and financial fraud rather than the perpetrator of federal crimes. But understand, if our investigation reveals you've been lying or attempting to obstruct justice, the consequences will be severe. As Janice and I left the FBI field office, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. Agent Quinlan had listened to our evidence, recognized the validity of our timeline discrepancies, and agreed to investigate the possibility that Malvin was the real criminal. But our relief was short-lived. As we walked to the parking garage, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Malvin's number. Eryndor, his voice carried a coldness I'd never heard before. I understand you've been making some very serious accusations to federal investigators. That was a mistake. Malvin, if you're innocent, then you have nothing to worry about. Innocent? You think any of this is about innocence? You signed those papers Friday, which means you admitted guilt for embezzling from federal contracts. Now you're trying to take back your confession and blame me for your crimes? His tone shifted from cold to threatening. Let me explain something about federal investigations, brother-in-law. They don't like being manipulated by desperate criminals trying to escape justice. When they discover you've been lying about timeline discrepancies and forged evidence, they'll throw the book at you. The evidence speaks for itself, Malvin. Evidence can be interpreted many ways. For instance, those hospital records you're so proud of? Easy to fake with a little cooperation from sympathetic medical staff. The signature analysis? Any competent forger can create intentional discrepancies to suggest impersonation. The timeline problems? Convenient memory lapses from a gambling addict trying to avoid prison. I realized Malvin had prepared counter-explanations for every piece of evidence we'd presented to Agent Quinlan. He'd been planning this confrontation, anticipating my potential defense strategies. You can't explain away the technical errors in the federal contracts, I said. The specifications are impossible, written by someone without construction knowledge. Malvin laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. Those contracts were modified after you signed them, changed by federal administrators to correct your technical incompetence. The original versions you submitted were so poorly written they required extensive revision. Every defense we'd carefully constructed, he had a plausible counter-explanation. The hospital timeline could be falsified records. The signature discrepancies could be intentional misdirection. The material substitutions could be cost-cutting measures to cover gambling losses. Eryndor, Malvin continued, you have 24 hours to contact Agent Quinlan and withdraw your accusations. Confess to your crimes, accept responsibility for your gambling addiction, and I'll make sure you get minimum sentencing. Continue this charade, and I'll ensure you spend the next 20 years in federal prison. The line went dead, leaving me standing in the parking garage with the sinking realization that Malvin had been several steps ahead of me throughout this entire process. He'd anticipated my investigation, prepared counter-evidence for my discoveries, and positioned himself to discredit everything I might present to federal authorities. Janice, I said, showing her the call log, we're in more trouble than we realized. He's been planning for the possibility that I'd fight back. What do we do now? I looked at my wife, the woman who'd finally started believing in my innocence again, and realized the stakes had just increased dramatically. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. Malvin had essentially declared war, and the winner would determine who went to prison And who walked free? We find evidence he can't explain away, I said. Something so damning that no amount of preparation can counter it. But as we drove home through the gray October afternoon, I wondered if such evidence existed, or if Malvin had been too careful to leave traces of his real activities. That evening, Danny Rockwell called with news that changed everything. "Eryndor, you need to see something. I found records of material deliveries to construction sites that don't exist." Thursday morning, Danny Rockwell met me at a diner on the outskirts of Millbrook, far from the construction sites where Malvin might overhear our conversation. He arrived carrying a thick manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered something that changed everything. "Eryndor, remember those material deliveries I mentioned, the ones where premium supplies were ordered but cheaper alternatives were delivered to job sites?" Danny slid the envelope across the table. I started tracking where the premium materials were actually going. Inside were delivery receipts, GPS tracking records from supply trucks, and photographs Danny had taken while following delivery vehicles on his lunch breaks. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic material diversion that went far beyond simple cost-cutting measures. These Morrison building supply trucks were picking up premium materials from Henderson's Hardware, materials supposedly ordered for our construction sites, Danny explained, but instead of delivering them to the Westbrook Medical Center or Thornwick Elementary, they were taking them to addresses that don't exist. He pointed to a delivery receipt showing premium ceramic tiles worth $8,000 supposedly delivered to Millbrook Commerce Plaza, 1247 Industrial Boulevard. But when Danny had driven to that address, he'd found an empty lot that had never been developed. "I checked every address on these delivery receipts," Danny continued. "The Westbrook Shopping Plaza renovation at 892 Commerce Street, the Millbrook Community College dormitory upgrade at 445 University Drive, the Thornwick Business Center expansion at 1156 Professional Way. None of these addresses exist." The phantom construction sites represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in material orders, all supposedly for projects that existed only on paper. But the materials themselves were real, expensive, and being delivered somewhere else entirely. "Danny, where were the trucks actually going after picking up these materials?" He pulled out a series of photographs taken with his phone camera. Morrison Building Supply Warehouse on the north side of town. Every premium material order supposedly for non-existent job sites ended up at Malvin's warehouse. The photographs showed Morrison Building Supply trucks unloading premium tiles, fixtures, and construction materials at a large warehouse facility. Materials that had been ordered using my forged signature, paid for with my company's accounts, then resold through Malvin's supply business at full retail profit. "But here's the smoking gun," Danny said, producing one final document. "I found the sales records." Morrison Building Supply had been selling the diverted materials to legitimate construction companies throughout the region, generating substantial cash revenue that never appeared in any business records connected to Valecrest and Associates. Malvin had created a perfect money laundering operation: steal materials using forged signatures, resell them through his own business, then use the untraceable cash to fund the elaborate fraud scheme designed to frame me. "Danny, this is exactly what we need. Documentation that Malvin was systematically stealing materials and selling them for personal profit, while building a case to blame me for the missing money." "There's more," Danny said grimly. "I think Malvin knows I've been investigating him." He showed me text messages he'd received the previous evening. Anonymous warnings about workplace safety and suggestions that construction accidents happen to people who asked too many questions. The threats were subtle but unmistakable. "Danny, you need to take this evidence directly to Agent Quinlan. Don't go back to any construction sites, don't return to your apartment alone, and don't trust anyone connected to Malvin or his businesses." As Danny left the diner with copies of all his documentation, I called Agent Quinlan and requested an emergency meeting. The evidence Danny had compiled was irrefutable proof of systematic fraud that couldn't be explained away by gambling addiction or embezzlement accusations. 2 hours later, I sat in Agent Quinlan's office while she reviewed Danny's photographs, delivery records, and sales documentation. The material diversion scheme was so systematic and sophisticated that it required months of planning and extensive criminal coordination. "Mr. Valecrest, this evidence shows clear intent to commit fraud using your identity and business credentials," Agent Quinlan said. "The phantom construction sites, the material diversions, the sales through Morrison Building Supply, It all points to a coordinated criminal conspiracy. Agent Quinlan, can this evidence be explained away like the other accusations? She shook her head. These are federal crimes with physical evidence, GPS tracking data, and financial records that can be independently verified. Unlike signature analysis or timeline disputes, material theft and money laundering leave paper trails that can't be fabricated or explained by convenient excuses. Agent Quinlan picked up her phone. I'm issuing search warrants for Morrison Building Supply, Malvin Carraith's business records, and any properties associated with the phantom construction addresses. We'll also need protective custody arrangements for you and your foreman until we can make arrests. The investigation had finally shifted from prosecuting me to prosecuting the real criminals. But as Agent Quinlan coordinated with other federal agencies, my phone rang with Malvin's number. Eryndor, you've made a serious mistake involving federal agents in family business. His voice carried a menacing calm that made my skin crawl. Some problems can't be solved by running to the authorities. Malvin, it's over. They have evidence of the material theft, the phantom construction sites, everything. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can have accidents. Federal agents can be convinced that desperate criminals will say anything to avoid prison. The threat was unmistakable, but this time I wasn't facing him alone. Agent Quinlan was listening to our conversation on speakerphone, recording every word as additional evidence of criminal conspiracy and witness intimidation. Mr. Carraith, Agent Quinlan interrupted. This is FBI Special Agent Patricia Quinlan. You're currently under investigation for federal contract fraud, identity theft, and material embezzlement. I'd advise you to contact legal counsel immediately. There was silence on the line before Malvin hung up without another word. Agent Quinlan, how long before you can make arrests? Search warrants will be executed within 6 hours. If the evidence at Morrison Building Supply confirms your foreman's documentation, we'll have enough to charge Malvin Carraith with multiple federal crimes carrying sentences of 20 years or more. That evening, from a secure location provided by Federal Protective Services, I watched news reports of FBI raids on Morrison Building Supply and 3 associated warehouse facilities. Agents recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of construction materials that had been stolen using forged signatures and sold through criminal distribution networks. The phantom construction sites that had been used to justify the material orders were exposed as elaborate fabrications designed to hide systematic theft from legitimate construction companies throughout the region. But the most damning evidence came from Malvin's personal computer, seized during the warehouse raid. Federal investigators discovered detailed records of the identity theft scheme, including practice signatures, forged documents in various stages of completion, and financial records showing how stolen material sales had funded the elaborate fraud designed to frame me. Malvin Carraith was arrested at his home Friday morning, charged with federal contract fraud, identity theft, material embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against the United States government. The man who had tried to destroy my life was now facing the same 20-year prison sentence he had planned for me. 3 months after Malvin's arrest, I stood in the conference room of the newly renamed Valecrest Construction Solutions, looking out at Millbrook's skyline through windows that no longer felt like prison bars. The federal charges against me had been formally dropped, my business license reinstated, and my reputation slowly rebuilding one honest contract at a time. Agent Quinlan had kept her word about protective custody and witness support. The investigation revealed that Malvin's criminal network extended far beyond material theft and identity fraud. He'd been running similar schemes against other small construction companies throughout the region, using his accounting background and family connections to identify vulnerable targets who could be systematically destroyed while he absorbed their clients and assets. Danny Rockwell sat across from me, no longer just a foreman, but now my business partner and co-owner of the restructured company. His courage in documenting the material theft had not only saved my life, but exposed a criminal conspiracy that had victimized dozens of honest business owners. The Westbrook Medical Center project is back on track, Danny reported, reviewing the morning's progress reports. Full crew, premium materials as originally specified, and the client couldn't be happier with our work quality. I nodded, but my satisfaction came from more than just business recovery. The past 3 months had taught me valuable lessons about trust, documentation, and the difference between staying quiet to keep peace and staying alert to protect what matters. Janice walked into the conference room carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Our marriage had survived the betrayal, though it took weeks of honest conversation and counseling to rebuild the trust that Malvin's manipulation had nearly destroyed. The insurance settlement came through, she announced, handing me a check for $347,000, representing compensation for business losses, reputation damage, and emotional distress caused by Malvin's criminal activities. Agent Quinlan said this is just the first payment. The federal restitution program will provide additional compensation as they recover more stolen assets. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was sitting in my own office again, running my own company, making decisions based on honesty rather than fear. Malvin had tried to make me disappear quietly, convincing everyone I was weak, unreliable, and criminal. Instead, he'd revealed his own weakness, the arrogance that comes from underestimating quiet people who pay attention to details. "There's something I want to show you both," I said, pulling a folder from my desk drawer. Inside were thank you letters from other business owners who'd been victimized by similar fraud schemes. Agent Quinlan had connected me with a network of entrepreneurs who'd survived identity theft, embezzlement, and systematic destruction attempts. "This letter is from Marcus Thalbridge in Cedar Springs," I read aloud. His brother-in-law tried to steal his auto repair business using forged loan documents and fabricated customer complaints. This one's from Elena Vorthak in Riverside, whose partner attempted to frame her for tax evasion while embezzling client funds. The letters reminded me that Malvin's scheme wasn't unique. Across the country, criminals were using family relationships and trusted positions to destroy honest people who'd built something worth stealing. But they also reminded me that quiet strength, careful documentation, and persistence could defeat even sophisticated fraud. "Eryndor," Janice said, "Agent Quinlan called this morning. Malvin pled guilty to all federal charges, 22 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and permanent prohibition from operating any financial or construction-related businesses." 22 years. The sentence he'd planned for me was now his own reality. But I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Only relief that he could never again destroy innocent people's lives for personal profit. That evening, I sat in my home office writing thank you notes to everyone who'd supported me during the investigation. Danny, who'd risked his job to document the truth. Agent Quinlan, who'd listened when she could have dismissed me as another desperate criminal. Even Tom Henderson from the hardware store, who'd eventually provided crucial evidence about the phantom material orders. As I wrote, I realized this experience had taught me something fundamental about survival in a world where not everyone operates with honest intentions. Staying quiet isn't the same as staying passive. Trusting people doesn't mean failing to verify their claims. And sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile while they sharpen their knives. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, preparing to record a message I'd been thinking about for weeks. "Hi, I'm Eryndor Valecrest, and if you're watching this, you might be going through something similar to what I experienced. Maybe someone's trying to frame you for crimes you didn't commit. Maybe a trusted family member or business partner is systematically destroying your reputation while positioning themselves as your savior." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Here's what I learned. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right, and never let anyone convince you to stay quiet about injustice. The people trying to destroy you are counting on your silence, your tendency to avoid conflict, your desire to maintain family peace or business relationships. But sometimes fighting back isn't about anger or revenge. Sometimes it's about refusing to disappear quietly when someone decides you're inconvenient. I looked directly into the camera. Your story matters. Your truth matters. And if you're being systematically undermined by someone who thinks they're smarter than you, remember that criminals always make mistakes eventually. Your job is to be patient enough to document those mistakes when they happen. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone who used your own kindness against you? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and maybe your story will help someone else recognize the warning signs before it's too late. I ended the recording and saved it to upload later. Tomorrow, I'd return to building honest construction projects and helping other fraud victims navigate the legal system. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be sitting in my own home, planning my own future, finally free from someone else's criminal ambitions. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. Sometimes it's just refusing to let them make you disappear. Up next, You've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.